Thank you for listening to this podcast from TRE, Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain and around the world. For more information, please visit TRE.radio.
Discuss, challenge, inform, comment, viewpoint on Talk Radio Europe.
Giles Brown.
Live comment and discussion with studio guests. Viewpoint.
It is Tuesday, the 17th of January. The time has just gone 10 minutes past. No, it hasn't. It's gone 4 minutes past 10. Start how you mean to go on. And welcome back to Viewpoint, Talk Radio Europe's current affairs program with a panel of invited guests. The first one of 2023. Due to a couple of issues, we were unable to bring you that before, bring that Viewpoint before, but now we're back with a bang. And we'll get a few things sorted out. And I've got a weather break here, so this before we get involved with Viewpoint, let's have a discussion about. I'm joined by. Let's say hello to the panel first of all. I think. Good morning to you, Alf.
Good morning, Giles. Nice to be back.
Yeah, good. And on my right, Rosalind Scott Gibb.
Morning, Giles. Nice to see you again after so long.
Indeed, yes, indeed. Right then, let's get the weather. We won't argue about the weather. We can argue about something else a bit later on. So let's see what the weather's doing, shall we?
The weather forecast is brought to you by Liberty Seguros. Liberty Seguros, the #1 preferred expat insurer, has more than 200 dedicated expat agents and brokers who understand your needs and speak your language.
And Richard's come in. Oh, hello. I see. Right. Okay, this is fine. Okay, let's get this. I see. That's interesting. Good morning, Richard. Richard's giving me a weather report. Sun everywhere. End.
The weather on Talk Radio Europe. Find us at TRE.radio.
But alas, Richard, your forecasting powers have waned this morning, for it was raining on me as I came down from the lake. There's a great and Alf too. Anyway, starting off, Costa del Sol. Sunny intervals, rain though. At 18 is the high today. Granada, mostly cloudy with light rain showers. 10 at the moment, a high of 12. Almeria, sunny spells and blustery today. Getting it to 85 kilometers an hour. I'd say that's blustery. Anyway, your high is 19, currently 15 degrees. Murcia, sunny spells, high of 22, currently 17. Alicante, 21 degrees is the high. It's currently 14 sunny intervals. Denia, 17 degrees and sunny, mainly sunny with a high of 21. Meanwhile, over on the islands, good morning to you, Ibiza. Lengthy sunny spells, but it is very windy indeed from the west. Look out for that. 80 kilometers an hour. Also in Palma, I believe. Yes, indeed, windy in Palma. It was windy up at the casita last night as well. Lengthy sunny spells in Mallorca. 19 is your high. And finally, Gibraltar. Mostly cloudy. Might be some rain around. Currently 15, 17 is a high, and winds from the west. That is your weather for today, Tuesday, the 17th of January.
The weather on Talk Radio Europe. Find us at TRE.radio.
To contact TRE, please call 952 78 4000. Email studio@tre.radio. Send us a WhatsApp on +34 645 99 67 95. Message us on Facebook, Talk Radio Europe Official, or tweet us at TRE Talk Radio.
But first of all, let's have a look at the morning front pages. Almost all of Tuesday's front pages feature Met Police Officer David Carrick, who pleaded guilty to dozens of sexual offences. Just how did the police miss serial rapist in its ranks, asked the Daily Express. The Sun describes him as the monster of the Met, while the Daily Mirror says the Met had 9 chances to stop him, but failed to act. Just how many more monsters in uniform, asked the Daily Mail. This, of course, after, was it Wayne Couzens, of course. The Daily Telegraph says the Met Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, will be under particular pressure because, as the former Assistant Commissioner in charge of Special Operations, he was in effect Carrick's boss when some of his offending was taking place. In an editorial, the Mirror says official apologies and admissions of failures are not enough. The paper says those paid to uphold the law must come up with a foolproof system of avoiding recruiting villains and catch offenders in uniform. Former Home Secretary Priti Patel tells the Express that a change of law is needed to help clean up the Met. In an editorial in The Sun, describes Scotland Yard as a broken force which betrays Londoners and shames Britain. Elsewhere, the Telegraph describes the UK government's decision to block Scotland's law on gender recognition as unprecedented, while The Guardian says Scottish ministers will mount a legal challenge. The newspaper says the dispute will only deepen the rift between the two governments, but it argues that it isn't likely to increase support for independence in Scotland. In an editorial, the Times says Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was right to block the Holyrood Law, because it effectively extends the new Scottish right of gender self-identification to the rest of the UK by the back door, and that this is unacceptable. The Mail agrees, describing Mr Sunak's decision as an act of political courage that will be applauded on both sides of the border. Writing in the Times, Education Secretary Gillian Keegan accuses teachers of turning their backs on children after members of the National Education Union, the NEU, voted to stay strikes in England and Wales. The paper says ministers are concerned that the walkouts will disrupt education and harm the economy because parents will have to stay off work. But the union has warned that teachers are leaving the profession in droves, while the government seems unbothered about the conditions they are allowing schools and colleges to slide into. The Financial Times says billions of pounds in tax is being uncollected because more than 2,000 HM Revenues and Customs staff have been transferred to work on Brexit and COVID schemes. The paper says Treasury Minister Victoria Atkins gave details in a response to questions from the Liberal Democrats. She revealed that the amount of tax recovered through compliance had fallen by about £6 billion in recent years. And finally, some of the papers report that Boris Johnson is expected to earn £6 million for his memoir. The Express says the book will be a sensational expose. Although, sorry, Rosalind's face just made me crack up. Excuse me. So far, it has failed. It has no title or publication date, and spare's already been taken. The Mirror says the book should be found in the fiction section of bookshops. Right then, those headlines again from the top. Grim reading. Met officer admits to brutal campaign of rape or terror. The Daily Telegraph, we have failed. He should not have been an officer. The Metro, Met cop admits he's a serial rapist. 9 chances to stop rapist cop. That's the Daily Mirror. The Daily Mail, just how many more monsters in uniform? The Eye, police crisis. 800 officers face inquiry after failure to stop rapist. Monster of the Met, that's the Sun. Just how did police miss a serial rapist in its ranks? That is the Express. The Times, mass walkout by teachers will hit millions of pupils. Financial Times, US Pharma Group pulls out of NHS deal in warning shot over drug pricing. And finally, world's most feared mafia boss is caught after 30 years on the run. This is the Godfather, Matteo Messina Denaro, who was arrested, and they say bada bing about his exploits. Some of them are pretty horrendous. And those are your headlines. If you want to get involved in today's show, then these are the numbers.
To contact TRE, please call 952 78 4000. Email studio@tre.radio. Send us a WhatsApp on +34 645 99 67 95. Message us on Facebook, Talk Radio Europe Official, or tweet us at TRE Talk Radio.
Right then, let's have a look at the front page stories. I think we've got to lead with this one. This is this shocking admission by the Metropolitan Police officer that he was involved in a campaign of rape and terror. This is David Carrick, found to have sent some of his victims selfies in uniform whilst at work. Shocking revelations. The Met says that it's failed again. The Met admission failed the public by allowing Carrick to be in its ranks. The Forces Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, says Carrick abused women in the most disgusting way and apologised. Something is very seriously wrong with the Metropolitan Police Force panel, isn't it? Let's, Ros, do you want to kick off with this one?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is obviously... Am I on?
Yeah, you're on.
Sorry. The first thing that comes to mind is certainly some of, if not all, most of these women should have reported it to the police. So it has to mean they were ignored, or their complaint wasn't carried through, which leads me to my present interest. I went to a lecture last week on suffragism, and And I realized that although women got the vote, for example, this does connect. It's all tied together. Don't panic, Giles. And after the First World War, women were working and they were paid 50% of what men were paid.
Right.
Well, that's okay, but we are 100 years later and women are still paid 30% less. We've only gained 20% in 100 years. And then so then people will say, yeah, but the law's changed and women are protected. Well, this is a typical example of how, yes, the law has changed. And the law's changed in many countries like Spain, the UK, protecting women. And when you bring a case of rape or abuse forward, but here we have a very obvious example where the law is not being enforced and women are not being protected and looked after.
And it comes on the back of several other. We've had the Wayne Couzens case, of course, where he was jailed for the murder of a young woman, Sarah Everard, and once again we've seen the resignation of Dame Cressida Dick over the Couzens case, and yet here we are back again, Alf.
Well, it wasn't just the Couzens case. This is a whole view, a holistic view, I think is the word, of the police forces. It highlights on the Met Police because they're obviously the biggest, they're obviously got more money, they're obviously part of that central London build-up. But from my perspective, I want to put a different twist on it. These people did raise the issues, they did make complaints, the complaints were investigated, inverted commas, but they were found not to have done anything wrong and they carried on. And I tell you what my problem is. I lived in industries where we changed from industrial relations to human resources, and the whole point of having these human resource people is that they're independent effectively from the organisation. They operate directly to the top of a company so that individual managers, and let's put the police force into its right context, they are no different from any other company. They have a management structure. They might call them captains and sergeants and whatever, military-wise, but they're just a company who employ a lot of people. And what they haven't got right, and they can't have right, Sadiq Khan pointed it out with Cressida Dick. He's going to point it out again now. The new guy sounds a bit different, but they're taking too long to change their internal structures. It's not about having Priti Patel, she has got some
nerve, exactly.
Absolutely, Priti Patel, we need to change the law. Change the law from what? The law are the police. The police are not policing themselves because they don't have, internally, they do not have a proper investigation process that is separate from the management structure. And that's what needs to change in the police, so that, and it's not about, independence. It's about doing the job properly. You have a set of rules and you follow the rules. And what you don't have is you don't have a disciplinary panel of the peers of the person who you're disciplining, because that's what lets them off, because they're all frightened about their own jobs.
952 78 4000. Morning call, you're live on TRE. What's your name? Where are you calling from? What's your viewpoint, please? Hello, you're live on TRE. Good morning.
Morning, Kate. Costabanco.
Welcome back.
I thought I heard Ros say, much to my surprise, that it was obviously that the women weren't being listened to. They would have made complaints. No. I throw myself back 50 years long more at school. It was normal playground discussion that, you didn't actually report things because your parents wouldn't believe you, etc. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear, Kate. Don't worry.
Right.
I will let you know if I can't hear you.
Presumption that there were complaints made and that the police didn't take notice of them is not true. I think there's too many cases where people haven't complained. And how are you going to be believed?
Ros?
Well, 50 years ago, yes. First of all, women would be reluctant to report a rape. But these days, I'm sure women are much more liberated than that. But secondly, for 25 years, I mean, this went on and not one case? I mean, that nobody pointed a finger at this police officer?
But if they didn't, there weren't any complaints.
I don't believe there would be any complaints.
I don't think things have changed.
Yes, there were. Sorry, we've got to stop this nonsense. There were complaints, they were investigated, and the police disciplinary committee found nothing was found on the individual. 3 times he was had on a disciplinary offence, 3 times he was let off.
Right,
so
3
we've got to stop the nonsense that says they didn't complain, because they did. What didn't happen is that the police didn't undertake proper procedures internally to make sure these are called human resources people.
But it's not not an HR problem.
Of course it's
this
an
is
HR
a legal
problem.
I'm sorry, it's a legal case.
No, it's not a legal case.
It's a crime. It's a crime. Rape is a crime. Sorry.
24
rape is a crime.
24 cases of crime he admitted to. Not one of those went to a disciplinary committee. He went to disciplinary committees for other offences, of which he's owned up to, I don't know, was it 49 now? He's on 24 rapes and other individual cases. For someone who's come in front of a manager, let alone HR or anybody, for someone who's come in front of a manager that many times, or it's been noted 3 or 4 times, you have to have questions about the people who are his managers.
Kate,
you have to question the managers, and it is an internal problem. And if HR don't sit on top of the managers and say, you will follow this procedure, because that procedure, by the way, is the legal process. It's not the police investigating the police, it's HR and the people who run the organisation.
Well, I think it's a criminal case. I think
they're all criminal cases.
Quite apart from
Giles,
what happens with...
Can we change to another subject? Because I think both of your resident experts are coming in with relevant information, but we've had it now. Can we go on to something more?
We've only okay, I've been back in the hot seat now for 22 minutes, and you're now telling me how to do this show. Gosh, I've missed this. I've missed being here, I tell you. Isn't it just
good?
Indeed. Isn't it just a case of aren't we all getting a bit tired of hearing the Metropolitan Police run out those same situations of a few bad apples? I mean, we keep hearing, but how many bad apples do we have? What sort of greengrocer are you if you've got a shop full of bad apples?
It's not only that, they keep professing...
but it's not a shop full of bad apples, is it?
No.
Well,
can we
2 apples in a barrel.
To another subject?
No, because Kate, you've had one call in. There could be other callers want to have their points of view. Thank you very good to hear from you again. It's not speed dating, you know. We don't have one subject, we have a thing, and then we go on to it.
And there's no change. There's been no change. There's been no change for 7 years, because that's when they first started. That's when Sadiq Khan first started attacking the Metropolitan Police for the way they handled their internal processes. The answer, even from this new guy, was, well, of course, you know, this is why the government we've recruited 14,000 new police. This person was recruited when Labour were in government, not when the Tories were in government. The processes that they used to recruit this person should have identified this person as a person with a problem. Before he was even recruited, he should never have been. Even the police are saying he should never have been recruited into the police. So it's the internal processes and procedures that are causing the problem.
May I speak? Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, there's 2 separate issues here. One is internal departmental problems or inefficiencies, which you could apply then to any company. But the other is a criminal case. I'm sorry, if you abuse anybody and here in Spain, it's a denuncia. You denounce them, you take them to court. There's a court case. Why were there no court cases? And I don't believe that women wouldn't have complained or set it in motion. Not one woman in 25 years. There's something very strange going on. 2 issues.
952-784,000. Morning, caller. You're live on TRE. What's your name? Where are you calling from? What's your viewpoint, please?
Yeah, hi. It's John Carrington.
Morning, John.
Phoning in. I'm an ex-DCI from the Met. I'm incredibly disappointed, shocked, and goodness knows what else, what's happened in the Met. But I haven't listened to all your conversations, but I just turned on the middle. But from the point of view of one of the things that's gone wrong is that about 40 years ago, they in effect abolished the professional CID. The CID were professionals at investigating crime. And when they effectively they abolished them, the Met Police were unable to investigate crime properly. And I suspect that one of the reasons these people have, or this guy and others haven't been prosecuted, is because the investigating officers have been incapable of investigating the crimes correctly and obtaining sufficient evidence to prove the cases.
So we need to get the CID back in, and because you think, I mean, is it a case of cutbacks? I mean, we've been told about the way that policing had been going. Excuse me. And
no, what they actually did, they decided that for whatever reason that the CID were too elite or whatever, so they put them under the control of the uniform branch. So therefore, I used to have to report to a uniform senior officer rather than a CID officer, and the uniform officer frequently had no idea of criminal investigations. I used to have to explain it to him. And then they also brought in what they called interchange. So a person joined the CID and became a detective constable, and then they passed the sergeant's exam. They went back to uniform for a couple of years and then applied for the CID again. Then they came back as a detective sergeant. They then passed the exam and became an inspector, went back to uniform. And what it meant was, at the end of the day, we didn't have professional CID officers who knew how to investigate crimes. And that's the most serious thing that's gone wrong with the police. And in investigating rapes, which is obviously an incredibly serious crime, if you don't have a professional to do it, it doesn't work. And it's rather like taking, say, a GP one day and making him into a surgeon, a brain surgeon the next day, and wondering why the system doesn't work.
Mm.
But the police haven't seemed to accept it. I mean, management and all that's good. But one of the things what went wrong with the Met is that they started they had direct entrance from university, and it got overtaken by management. And then the police were becoming managers, not investigators. I was supposed to create pie charts and God knows what else, instead of going out and investigating real crime that was happening. And it was more important to produce a plan or whatever, which I knew nothing about, rather than investigating the crime, which I was an expert on.
Ross.
And that's
John,
what's gone wrong.
Okay. John, can I just ask you a question?
Of course.
Okay, so say it's a woman or a person comes in to report a rape, but it's not a policeman, it's somebody else. It's a husband or a neighbor or whatever.
Yeah.
So would there still be the same inefficiencies, the same problems in having the person prosecuted?
Yeah, it's the problem is that they don't have professional investigators in the Metropolitan Police anymore because they've destroyed the training system. And that applies. I mean, as far as rape's concerned, it's incredibly difficult to prove a rape. And I know this might sound very old-fashioned, but I dealt with lots of cases where women would come in, usually young women, and say they'd been raped because they were worried they were pregnant. And then within the month, they'd come back and say, no, I don't want to do anything about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so
yes, and also there's the problem of a woman saying she's raped and then she's threatened by the man, and so she withdraws the complaint. So it's a difficult area.
I personally never was aware of any situations like that whatsoever, but I did retire 35 years ago. Well, it may happen now. Yeah. It certainly didn't happen in my day, because if somebody got threatened, I would be straight round and arrested the person who's threatening them.
Thanks for your
Yeah. Okay, if there's any other questions, I'm happy to ask.
Thank you very much,
yes, John.
Thanks, John.
Good year to you as well, son.
Yeah.
Let's take the emotion out of this. Forget it's women. Forget there's rape. And let's just look at what companies do, not just the police. If someone's found stealing, that's a criminal offence. In any business, it's a criminal offence. 99.9% of all companies investigate themselves, deal with it themselves, and end up disciplining an individual. Only about 1% of those people who are found to be guilty of theft ever face a criminal charge. They all get dismissed. They all have, elements of surprise put on packages to not get decent jobs in the future. But that's how industry has always handled it. Why should the police be treated any differently? It's different in the army because you've got a military setup. Yeah, go on, John.
Yeah. I just answer this. In the police force, when I was a serving officer, if a person committed any crime, any police officer, anybody, anyone committed a crime, it would be investigated by a professional CID officer. And if there was sufficient evidence, they would go to court. And that had nothing, there was no line between a police officer or anybody else.
That's because John, that's the rules, that's the process inside the police force.
No, Alf.
Yes, it is, John. It's the police who decide that the CID person was to investigate, wasn't it?
Alf, with respect, I was a police officer. Yeah. I know nothing about trade unions, so I wouldn't question you on that. But what I'm telling you is how the police force worked. Because the police force, their discipline code was I don't know, it was much stricter than criminal law. People could be dismissed from the police force for relatively minor things. In other words, maybe, and I know this is a silly example, not keeping their garden nice in their house. So the neighbours complain, that would become a complaint, and the officer would be disciplined within the service for that. Not a crime.
I know someone who was sacked from industry for stealing a salt pot out of a disco. So it happens in all industries. Stop isolating it. You're right, John. I'm not
saying it doesn't, Alf. What you're saying is that there is a management way of investigating things that doesn't apply to the police.
It does. The management process in the police is that the manager gives it to CID to investigate.
Alf,
that's their process.
Alf, as a police officer, I don't know about now because things have changed. As a police officer, if somebody came in and alleged a crime by anybody, it was investigated by a professional CID officer. And that happened to be like no matter who that was that allegedly committed the crime, it was investigated the same. It was a criminal offence investigated by a criminal investigator, and it would take the criminal route. In other words, go to court.
But the CID officer who was given the responsibility of undertaking the investigation did not have the right to decide what the discipline offence is. They report to someone. Hold on. So who did they report to?
No, hold on. I'm talking about a crime. In the case of this thing, we're talking about rape and indecent assaults and whatever. A crime was investigated by a CID officer, and the CID officer decided whether or not to bring a charge and whether it would go to court. He then, if it was going to go to court, probably submitted a report to solicitor's branch, so that there will be a solicitor at court. But the actual investigation and the decision to prosecute would have been the CID officer or his immediate senior CID officer.
Senior CID officer. So the management
change. Why did it? You explained, John, very clearly that it did change, but why did it change? Obviously, it was a system that worked, and now we have a system that does not work. So why did it change?
Well, as you did say, one of the reasons they started, as it were, dismantling the CID was because the uniform branch thought the CID looked upon themselves as elite compared with the uniform branch. So therefore, they eventually, by internal means, took over the CID. So instead of me reporting as a detective chief inspector to a detective chief superintendent, I reported to a uniform chief superintendent. And that way, he didn't know what my job was. He didn't know if I was investigating anything properly. He had no way of supervising me because he didn't have the knowledge. And that's where it all went wrong. And I don't see how they can ever put it right.
But that didn't happen by stealth, John. That didn't happen, unnaturally. Somebody in the organisation made that decision. It wasn't the uniform creeping up on CID and overtaking them. A manager would have made a decision. In your view, the wrong decision. In my view, an even ultra wrong decision. But they made that decision. It wasn't made by a CID officer or some guy in a uniform. It was made by the management unit.
Alf, with respect, there was no management structure of which you're talking about within the police service when I was a police officer. Okay. There were police officers.
Yes. So who?
And CID was dealt with by CID officers.
Right, well, let's bring it up to date a little bit. Cressida Dick.
Well, I can't.
Who did Cressida Dick report to? She was the chief. She's the top person in the Met Police at the time, Cressida Dick. Who did she report to?
Well, it would have been the Home Secretary, wouldn't it?
No.
In effect, the Home Secretary. But in fact,
No, she reported to her employer. Her employer was the London Council. She reported to She reported to the police committee of the GLC.
No, actually,
my mate is the chair of the police committee of the GLC. She reported to him. He reported to Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan goes to see her and says, "I'm not happy with what you're doing, and I'm sacking you." It had nothing to do with the Home Secretary or anybody else.
Right.
He sacked her. He sacked her, didn't he?
The commissioner is actually appointed on the authority of the Queen or the monarch.
Right.
Yeah, but who sacked her?
Okay, well...
Nobody sacked her. She resigned because
sacked her.
The Mayor of London was giving her such a hard time.
Yeah, vote of no confidence.
Because he was right.
Right then, 9:50. Okay, John, thank you very much for the call in. We're going to take a short break and then back with more Viewpoint.
This is Talk Radio Europe.
Online at TRE.radio. Talk Radio Europe. Viewpoint with Giles Brown.
Viewpoint back with a bang as always. 952. I'll give you the phone numbers here. Joined in the studio by Alf Brewer and Rosalind Scott Gibb. If you want to put your thoughts forward, you got something we want to discuss, then these are the numbers.
To contact TRE, please call 952 78 4000. Email studio@tre.radio. Send us a WhatsApp on +34 645 99 67 95. Message us on Facebook, Talk Radio Europe Official, or tweet us at TRE Talk Radio.
And let's look at some of the comments coming in. Richard says, WhatsApp, of course. It's an HR issue that leads to a legal issue. We have 1,000 bad apples, 1,600 according to the chief. There are procedures to follow before it goes to court. Why should we be shocked? Because the Metropolitan Police has been like this for decades. And it isn't a criminal offence if it's under £200. It's presumably salt pots or salt shakers. And, something doesn't happen now, which is why London is like the Wild West. 952 78 4000 is the phone number. Ross.
Okay, well, just while we're on this subject and the offshoot and women, because it is a big issue that women should be protected by law from abuse and rape. And one would hope that it is improving. Like in Spain, it's improving, but it's still not perfect. That the law is in place, but the cases still don't necessarily benefit the woman. But on this subject of sort of equal but different, which has been going on for hundreds of years, one of the bottom lines is, of course, being paid, equal but different. And so in order to try and reach that, where women are graduating in all fields and working in all fields and equal but different to men, they want to be treated that way. So I was quite kind of appalled that the NHS, for example, is bringing in time off for women of menopause age. So they get time off paid.
Yeah.
Now, out of two, I've got figures here. Yeah. Just a minute. Let me get the figures. Oh, yes, that's 1 million. 1 million of the 1.3 million staff are women in the NHS.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm very pro nurses, and I really believe they need to be treated with more respect, more money, everything else. So I think this really is a step in the wrong direction. And so if they're of, 1/5, 20% of those are of menopausal ages.
Yeah.
So they're going to relax the working conditions during the unprecedented crisis. So that they don't have to, they can work from home, they don't have to show up. They don't have to fulfill the obligations of the job. Now, to me, this is definitely a step in the right direction. So I'd love to hear from our listeners. Now, the other one, so I looked up about Spain is in the process of finalizing the law so that women can take 2 to 3, 4 days off a month, paid leave, for menstrual problems. Mm-hmm. Now, and I thought, well, what is this all about? Most of us wouldn't even have thought that. I just choose paracetamol. But so it actually started it was about 100 years ago in Russia was the first country to give this to women. And then, of course, because they were working in factories and they didn't have the facilities, right? So there's 6 countries at the moment, none in Europe, who allow this or have brought in this legislation. But there's 6 countries around, like Japan. Now, Japan is not, it's quite interesting how this works. The women got the vote in Japan in 1932, but they weren't allowed the pill until 1999 because the parliament is all men, whereas they got Viagra before they got the pill. Okay. As soon as it came out, it was voted in. So just giving an idea. So it is legal. Women are entitled to 2 or 3 days off a month in these countries, Thailand, Japan, Taiwan. But the women don't take it. Right. Partly because it's they still don't like to talk about these things with men. Fair enough. But so I'm just really raising my point that this is taking us in the wrong direction and that we're not moving forward in the way we should be.
When you say taking us in the wrong direction?
Well, sure, because you bring in a law like this, women are entitled to take 2 or 3 or 4 days off a month for Well, then, okay, so then we don't hire a woman because we need somebody who can work the full month. So then, but it plays right into the hands of those who think women are not capable.
How do you get, because obviously some women suffer terribly every month.
Well, I'm sorry, you have to take it off your sick leave. Most women you just get on with it. You just get on with it.
That's the problems. People do not understand. We used to have this process in the UK many years ago, right? We used to have an allowance for sick leave, right? And people used to understand this. But you was working in a telephone exchange with 50 or 60 telephonists. There was always a problem with this. They had to have separate facilities, a whole pile of things, and they were all women. This isn't being sexist. Very rarely did you see a bloke telephonist. Very rarely. Mm-hmm. It was just the nature of the industry. And part of the difficulty was that there used to be an understanding because the supervisors and the managers of the telephonists were women. They understood what was going on. Yeah. Then you try to introduce it and incorporate it so that everybody's equal and there's blokes. And first thing they do is take all the managers' jobs away from the women and give it to the blokes because that's the way the civil service operated and big companies. But effectively what happened is you had a reasonable medical system that allowed people to go off without having to stigmatise themselves that I need time off for this. And we used to literally, you'd go to the doctor and he'd write you a certificate and it was very vague on a number of them and that was it. And some people had, more than others. There used to be this thing. Most of the civil service, can't speak for general industry, but most of the civil service and a significant number of private big companies used to allow somewhere in the region of 10 days a year of sick leave effectively unaccounted for, right? And then what happened is big business got hold of the Tories when Thatcher come in, and they said people are abusing this because they're not really sick and they're staying at home. So they changed the sick leave arrangements so that now it becomes 4 days. If you're off for 4 days, you have to have a special report and all this doctor's notes and God knows what. Not only was it 4 days, in the good old days when you worked Monday to Friday in the main, except for if you worked in shops, they didn't include the weekends. So lots of people would go off sick on a Friday and they'd be off sick on a Monday, and the first thing that comes out from big business, because they take the 1% who abuse it, and they say these people are taking a long weekend off. Yeah. And we all used to go, yeah, but it's like, you would know the person. I would know the person out of, I don't know, I covered 800 people in my branch. I would know the 3 people out of 800 who would abuse it and do that. And you try talking to them, but to be honest, they're putting their finger up at the company, they're going to put the finger up at you. So you just try and manage it with the managers. But what happened, it became rigid. So they then included the Saturdays and Sundays. So if you had Friday off, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you either had, if you went in on the Monday, it was counted as 3 sick days. If you had the Monday off, it was counted as 2 sick days, Sunday and Monday. And all of a sudden these 10 luxury days become 4 rigid days, and everybody is panicking about what to do. And then you get the managers, and you have to put it into context. It's nothing to do with women or blokes. You get the managers who have to be I am the manager. I am telling you this. This is what the rules say. This is what you must do. And they then abuse their position and put pressure on people in industry that creates this sort of problem. And then all of a sudden you've got to have a law. You've got to have a rule that says, because you've got a menopausal problem, and if you've been around a woman who has that, it's not a couple of days a week. It could be for months. Or you've got someone who suffers during their menstrual period, and I mean suffer, I can't name personal things, but people they're in bed for 3 days. They cannot get out of bed.
Sorry, can you let the women speak?
No, that's not fair, Rosalind, because you're a woman doesn't give you any more rights to talk about women's issues.
It does.
Than any. Yeah, and I've got 3 daughters. I've got a wife. I've got 2 grandchildren.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you're an authority on everything.
No, I'm not an authority, but I do understand when they say we have a problem about getting to work. That's got nothing to do. It's because they're a woman, they've got a problem. And you've got to make a law that says that they can have time off because of that. There shouldn't be a law. There should be an understanding in industry. When a woman says, I've got a menstrual problem, that's it. The management should understand that. They shouldn't need it explained and have some law bashed on it.
How's it going to pan out when we have transgender in there as well? I mean, that's
exactly.
Good. Because that's going to be an interesting period as well for everybody, isn't it? If you've got 52 types of gender, as a friend of mine was talking, who's got a company in Germany who's going through the rules and regulations last year, it's going to make things even more complex for anybody who's running a business, surely, Ros?
Well, my concern just is that I believe, basically, bottom line, women should be paid equal pay for equal work. If they've got the education, they've got the experience, that's what they should be paid. And when decisions like this are made, which I was kind of surprised that Spain has done this, the first country in Europe to finalize this legislation, or the UK with the NHS, I was just quite shocked because I do personally feel it's a step in the wrong direction. Women will again we make 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I mean, I was, most of my life, I worked independently. I don't think I ever took time off. I just always worked. And 1/3 of all women suffer greatly from menstrual problems. And I was one of them. But I just took paracetamol. And that's what most women do. And I'm afraid if you're doing a job, you just have to do the job.
952 78 4000, the phone number. studio@tre.radio is the email. The Facebook page is Talk Radio Europe Official. And you can WhatsApp me on +34 645 99 67 95. Listen to the return of Viewpoint with me, Giles Brown, live from the studios of TRE, Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain. Like to hear your views on this or any other points, or anything else that you want to bring up that we should be talking about today. As I said, we haven't had Viewpoint for a while. And so obviously looking forward to you getting involved with today's show. 952. In fact, I'll let the thingy do that.
To contact TRE, please call 952 78 4000. Email studio@tre.radio. Send us a WhatsApp on +34 645 99 67 95. Message us on Facebook, Talk Radio Europe Official, or tweet us at TRE Talk Radio.
Indeed. I think people are starting to get up. Just to let you know what's coming up today on TRE Talk Radio, your voice in Spain. Following me will be Stephen Ritson with Europe Today. Looking forward to getting him back. Well, he's been on board for a while, but not following Viewpoint, and he's always quite frank with his opinions on what we've been discussing during the day. So that's almost worth the price of entrance alone. What else is happening today? Well, Selena will be with us with TRE in the afternoon. That's coming up from 2 until 4. Hannah, hopefully, I'm not exactly sure if Hannah's recovered from her throat infection, but there will be a TRE in the afternoon from 4 till 6. Bob James joins us with Spain today from 6 until 7. And then it's a repeat of this show, a repeat of Viewpoint from 7 till 9. This coming in from Margaret. This is a WhatsApp saying you can't take paracetamol. You can't take paracetamol if you're passed out in pain And then when you come round, you're throwing up every 5 minutes. 3 days off work every month. That's in reply to this thing.
Absolutely.
And, the Sanchez, the Spanish Parliament is, I remember that Zapatero has famously had brought women into the cabinet. They were sort of the PSOE's babes at the time.
Yeah.
So, it's got to be addressed somehow. I know you say it's men won't hire women because they're going to get 3 days paid time off, but
it's not true.
Well, it just goes against women trying to present the argument of equal but different. It means you're not equal. You're not capable of working a full month.
If you, how many times have you? Alf, I've got a crippling hangover because I was watching the England match yesterday, so I'll throw a sickie. Surely that's
absolutely that's what people used to do, and that's what industry. This is where you have to differentiate between the law and management. Everybody knew, not stupid, right? I follow West Ham. During...
I'm so sorry, that should take at least a month off for that, for a start.
You're laid down in a cold place, yeah. But what happened is, if you remember, when during the not 3 days straight, 3 day working week when, right, so West Ham played a cup match against Hereford during the week in the middle of the afternoon because there's no floodlights and things like that, and the ground holds 36,000. There must have been 56,000 people. I would guess that most of my colleagues who worked for BT at the time were in the ground, so nobody was working in BT. Everybody was there, and that's not an issue. So we have a game, and of course everybody then goes to the pub, and the next day, 10% of them ain't going to turn up for work, so they throw a sickie. Now, the managers, who are also at the game, by the way, they ain't going to be exonerated. The managers understood that, and like a blind eye is turned to it.
Okay.
So long as the people turned up the next day. Now, where you find the difficulty today is this differentiation between the law and management. If managers don't understand, and also, I will keep on, I don't like human resources, but they were brought in for a reason. The reason they were brought into industry was to remove it from industrial relations, which is that head-to-head unions representing staff and managers, into a different understanding about how a manager should manage the organisation. That's what human resources are about. They're not about conflict. They're about finding ways through conflict. So tell me,
why are I was just asking myself this yesterday. I may be wrong in the answer as I answered myself, but why teachers and nurses are paid treated, their conditions are so bad internationally in many countries. And then I realized, the majority of teachers and nurses are women.
Yeah, but that's private. That's public, very private sector. Isn't it? Let's face it. If you're working in the private sector as a nurse or a doctor, you get considerably better paid than you do if you're working for the private sector. Same with education. If you're teaching at a private school,
it's not true with teachers. See, people misunderstand what happens in industry. No woman teacher at a level gets treated any differently or pay-wise or conditions than a bloke at the same level. Mm-hmm. The difference is, and if you turn it back to when I started work, if you worked in a bank, the banks used to give out bonuses every year. The women got 50 quid, the blokes got 250 quid.
That's obviously, that's
right? That's how they do it. The industry, they're not doing it in an open way of saying we're going to treat this bloke different to this woman, and therefore we're going to pay this bloke more, this bloke teacher.
I didn't say that.
More than this woman
nurses
teacher.
Are paid traditionally
but you
quite
can't
low,
compare nurses.
less than their worth.
There must be 400 different types of nurses. You cannot compare one with the other. There's a ward nurse. There's a care home nurse. There's a.
But in general, Ross is making the general.
In general terms, nurses are not paid.
Nurses,
yes,
are underpaid.
For what we think they do as a job, they are underpaid. That's not the way that the industry. This is not nothing to do with government, Stephen. This is industry. If you pay a nurse on a ward, I don't know, for argument's sake, £10,000 a year to be a nurse on a hospital ward, you can bet your bottom dollar discover that the private sector health company is going to pay £15,000 a year, and they're both women. Yeah. Why has one woman got more than that, and they're doing the same job?
The other thing, the fact is that, but if you say, same but different, or as you were saying before, if you're not going to hire a woman because she might take time off because of health situations, and we can say that you might expect menopausal or menstrual.
No, stick with the big one.
Or pregnancy.
Called pregnancy.
Yeah,
pregnancy was the biggest reason for companies not to employ women. It's the biggest reason why they say. And the same happens in Spain, because I have personal choice of it. Especially the international schools will get rid of people who have had the audacity to get pregnant while they're a teacher, because they brought them all the way from England on next to no pay. It's called. I don't like it. It's not a woman's issue, by the way. It's an issue for society, and we are just wrong in keep on pushing it off as women have got to argue. No, it's about men understanding the position of women and men arguing the position of women in the same way.
Well, exactly, because it's the men that make the decisions. The women don't get on the board of directors. The very small percentage. Even the Parliament. I just looked up out of interest in the UK how many women are in the House of Commons. It's the highest ever, and it's 35%.
Yes, and that's because of the hours that they do. No normal woman, and I say normal in its proper terms, would ever embark on that, because it's not a 9 to 5 job.
You're trying to suggest that women... I've never worked in a 9 to 5 job in my life.
They should change the rule. I tell you what, I know people hate it. Go and have a look at what the European Parliament does, because they are family friendly. They do not work at long hours of a weekend. Yeah. They do not have sit-ins at 10 o'clock at night. They do not have all-night sit-ins. They work on a job that's a day job. And so it's about how do you transform... You don't transform Parliament by getting rid of the House of Lords. You transform Parliament by making it an industry-based organisation that operates on normal times, normal terms, normal conditions, so that it encourages women who want to have families, who do have families, who do have a different outlook on life, and you don't encourage them to go and join the House of Commons.
Just a few comments coming in. Female MPs are not employees, though. They are voted in by the electorate. So, yeah, thank you for that one, Richard. 952 78 4000, the phone number. Studio empty.
They're not employees, but they are the prisoners of the system in the House of Commons. The House of Commons decides it's not going to sit until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Not an MP. The MPs will vote on it, but it's the House of Commons transformation. It needs to start from the basis. An MP will get up in the morning at whatever time, usually quite early. They'll do 2 hours in their office. Then they'll go to the House of Commons and have their lunch. Then they'll do an afternoon session in between going to their office and answering letters and doing whatever they're doing. And then they'll sit there for another 3 hours until the evening session starts. And then they're going until 10 o'clock. Yeah. The division bell sounds at 10 o'clock, Monday to Thursday.
952 78 4000. I just use that as an example. But if you look at any companies, 10% are management positions.
Right then, those bongos mean the end of the first half of Viewpoint. We're back after the national and international news.
TRE. Talk Radio Europe.
Discuss, challenge, inform, comment, Viewpoint on Talk Radio Europe.
Giles Brown.
Live comment and discussion with studio guests. Viewpoint.
Back for the second half of the first show of the new season of Viewpoint. Group hug, everybody. Alf Brewer and Ross and Scott Gibb joining me in the studio this morning. If you want to get involved with today's show, you've got an issue you think we should be discussing, we're a broad church, we'll throw it open, then these are the numbers. These are the numbers, I'm telling you now.
To contact TRE, please call 952 78 4000. Email studio@tre.radio. Send us a WhatsApp on +34 645 99 67 95. Message us on Facebook, Talk Radio Europe Official. or tweet us at TRE Talk Radio.
And looking at your top 10 news stories, according to The Week, Met rapist said he was untouchable. Metropolitan Commissioner Mark Rowley says the force is investigating 1,000 sexual and domestic abuse claims involving about 800 of its officers. Boris is likely to publish a memoir like no other. Boris Johnson has announced plans to publish his memoirs. Fooling speculation, he's considering a political comeback. The former secretary, Nadine Dorries, is to publish an account of Johnson's downfall. This should be interesting, called The Plot. Johnson is said to tell his allies, tell her everything from his turbulent time in office. Sickness is costing the UK economy, according to reports. Rising ill health amongst working age people is costing the economy about £150 billion a year, according to an analysis for The Times. A hangover effect remains from the financial chaos seen during the brief reign of Liz Truss. The governor of the Bank of England has said, speaking to MPs, Andrew Bailey said, though the cost of government borrowing, which soared after the mini-budget, had normalised, international investors were still wary about lending money to the UK government. Brazil's Attorney General has indicted 39 people for their alleged involvement in the storming of the Senate building on the 8th of January. Meanwhile, the UK's government decision to block gender recognition reform risks reshaping the independence debate. This is according to the Scotsman. Yesterday, Westminster decided to block the Scottish bill designed to make it easier for people to change their legal gender. The first time a Scottish law has been blocked for affecting a UK-wide law. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan has accused teachers of turning their backs on children after the last year's teaching union voted in favour of strike action. Some 90% of those voted in the National Education Union ballot, backing a walkout. Meanwhile, rainbow towns and cities are being created as ethnic segregation in England and Wales falls, according to a new study. Researchers found there was a close to a 10-fold increase in diversity in Boston, Lincolnshire. Barking and Dagenham enjoyed a 9-fold increase, whilst diversity in Watford and Reading increased 4-fold. We're seeing growing diversity and spread. Meanwhile, Pope Francis has no phone contact with God, according to German Cardinal Gerhard Müller. The Times said the 75-year-old German prelate is setting himself up for a champion for conservative critics within the Catholic Church. And meanwhile, Jeremy Clarkson is likely to be dropped by Amazon after he admitted that the streaming service was incandescent over his newspaper column about Meghan Markle. The broadcaster faced a backlash after writing in The Sun last month he was dreaming of the days she was made to parade naked through every British town whilst crowds heard excrement and chanted shame. If you know your Game of Thrones, then you know where that comes from. And those are your 10 things that you need to know, according to The Week. Anybody want to pick up on any of those above? Rishi Sunak yesterday said that he was going to bring in laws to make certain strikes, to ban certain strikes, looking or certain protests as well, looking perhaps in the reaction to the Extinction Rebellion, for example, blocking the M25 several times last year to outrage from some of the right of centre press, of course, saying, Priti Patel getting involved with that. I mean, short of police marksmen taking him off the Dagenham to Whatsit Bridge, that was her response, and saying that certain industries shouldn't be allowed to strike as well. Pal, do we think that there should be some...
Whatsit Bridge?
You
made that one up,
yeah, I was in full flow there. I was in full flow and it failed me. So, like a duck puddling mallee.
Dagenham to Zog.
Now, what is the big bridge on the M25? The one of the huge bridge. Is it the...
You mean the Queen Elizabeth Bridge?
That's the
the Dartford River crossing.
That's the one, thank you. It's been a long time since I haven't been back to the old country.
There's also a big tunnel at the same place. Called the Dartford Tunnel.
I know the Dartford Tunnel.
So there's the Dartford River crossing and the Dartford Tunnel.
And there's the Blackheath Tunnel as well, isn't there?
No, that's Blackwall Tunnel.
That's the Blackwall Tunnel, thank you. Right then. Okay, thank you.
To Greenwich.
That's the one, yeah. My geography of land.
I say to Greenwich because it comes from the proper side of the water in East London.
Yes, all right. So... Rishi Sunak saying that he wants to stop. I mean, he wants to stop certain strike actions. Should you be able to disrupt people's lives and livelihoods, Ros, if it's a cause you believe in, be it.
Personally, I think no. I mean, it's just a personal opinion, and I feel quite strong. I would never strike. If I take a job, I would just get on with it, and if I don't like the situation I'm in, I would leave and get a different job. So although I'm very sympathetic to the nurses, and if they've only been driven to it because their conditions are so bad, and it takes a very special person to be a nurse. I couldn't do it. But I'm not sure it's a healthy direction to go in, to ban strikes. But if it's part of your contract, no strikes are allowed, you know what you're getting into, then perhaps
you should be allowed to strike. I mean, I think the worry is that they're going to be saying
no, that to ban strikes in certain industries, so that you take the job, you know that you're not allowed to strike. You're going to have to find other ways to discuss financial or other conditions.
Like the police.
The
police are not allowed to go on strike.
Right.
Neither the army, neither any of the military type stuff, neither is civil defence, neither is the radio stations who do the offshore lifeboats and stuff like that. And but you see, people don't understand. There used to be sort of thing, no strikes, which is a nonsense. If people got the ump at work, they'll find a way of making sure that the employer knows they've got the ump.
Presumably go slow then, or
all sorts of things. Sick days.
We're back to West Ham again, aren't we? I was just saying about being a broad church. I can't believe we went from Windsor Rights to West Ham in literally in 2 seconds. This coming in on the WhatsApps, which is +34 645 99 67 95. This coming in saying that striking very rarely works, and unfortunately the strikers of the RMT aren't bright enough to realise their striking is acting as a catalyst for their demise. That's Mick Lynch was demonised by Piers. Well, he tried to be demonised by Piers Morgan last year, and that sort of backfired quite spectacularly. I'd like to do my little story about what happened last year. It can relate to this. All right then.
We was doing Viewpoint, you and I, Giles. I think
other people are allowed in, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
It's just the Alpha and Giles show. But I'm just making that point because I've been.
There was somebody else in the studio, but I can't remember who it was. You've probably got a photograph, as you take lots of photographs when we're in here.
Yeah.
But a call come in.
I'm busy trying to keep this show going on the road. I'm not sitting doing selfies with a filter on.
I tell you, I bet you don't get double bubble for what you did for Dave.
Anyway, moving swiftly.
That's the union position. Double bubble, extra work.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, a call comes in, or a message comes in. I don't know if it's on WhatsApp or a thing, and it says, the message was quite simple. Is this the Alf Brewer who I used to meet outside Telephone House in Grange Road?
Yeah, you mentioned it.
And I said to you, who's that? And you went, it's Colin Bradley. I said, no, Colin Bradley. It's an Irish name, Colm, Colin Bradley. Oh, yeah. Thought nothing. I said, that's really great. It'd be really nice if Colin could ring in. So, me being me, I like talking. This is a guy who I met like 45 years ago, who I worked alongside. He was a union rep for the clerical group. And you gave me his phone number, so I rang it a couple of times and thought nothing of it, never got an answer. I go back for a reunion, my school reunion, and to see my mum in November. And while I'm there, I meet up with a bunch of my old BT mates, nearly all union blokes. And I said to him, it's really, really funny. I said, Colin Bradley rang me up and rang up the studio and left a message for me. And they said, that's really strange, Alf, because he's been dead for 4 or 5 years. They weren't sure whether it was for... I said, how weird. What person in their normal mind... I've never had this on Viewpoint. I've never had it in any of the union stuff I've ever done, been involved in, where somebody rings up and leaves you this message as if it's somebody who's alive, and you find out that they died a while ago. Immediately my mind was, what sick person does that sort of thing? But then you think, why would they do it? So I'll just leave that in the fog of the listeners to say, have you ever experienced that, and why do you think these people would do it? Now back to strikes. The complication with where we are, and let's just, people who have listened to me or heard me on Viewpoint in the past, and someone says strikes hardly ever work. I'll put it in a different context. Spending all my life doing trade union and labour activity work, strikes never work. They never work. unless you're doing some sort of a protest strike for a day, in which case you lose a day's pay, but that's a protest. But proper strikes never work. The complication is, and people will have to review, and you can't do it as a generalisation. The education union, the railway workers, the postal workers, the nurses, the midwives, whoever it is, you can't generalise it. You have to go to each specific. These people have made a brave decision to even vote for strike action. That's a brave decision in its first place. They weren't sure about the National Education Union, whether they were even going to get a majority. And teaching is one of the worst of people participating, because some schools will have 2 or 3 members, other schools will have 70, 80, 90% of them will be members. And so you'll get a variation and a patch. But and John Harper always goes on at me about this stuff because he doesn't agree. Negotiations always revolve and always conclude in a compromise.
Right.
I do not know, in all my time, I do not know where one side has come out on top of it. Even in the miners' strike, it was difficult to say the least. But when you are put into a corner, like the miners were, and there's no point in saying, I listened to it very carefully. Do the rail workers not realise that they're putting themselves in a position where they're driving their work away? Do you think that the rail unions and the rail companies are not doing that anyway? They want to get rid of most of what's going on. It's not even driverless trains. I tell you what, you get on a Docklands Light Railway, a driverless trains. Yeah. Nearly all of them now have guards on. Nearly all of them have a guard on. They're not a guard. They operate the doors. They don't need it because it's a driverless. The whole system is driverless. It's a weird. When we first set it up, it's really weird to get on a train.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Sit in the front window and watch Canary Wharf go past and the cranes, and there's not a person on the train other than passengers. Now, nearly all of them will have a guard, and if they're not a guard on all of the journey, there'll be a guard on for a piece of the journey. Right. Because people understand that things happen on these public transport, and you need somebody around. So you take whether you agree or you disagree with the rail workers, they know what they're going into. They know the threats about their jobs. They know the threats about their pay. They know their threats that are there every single day, and they're saying, well, yeah, but we're going to save some of it. The difference is, where I disagreed with, for example, Arthur Scargill, sometimes, you have to see the writing on the wall. I worked in the telecom industry. You only had to work there for 5 years to see the technology change and where it was going. Yeah. It was wiping people out. And the first thing you do, so we would say, we're not going to agree to a redundancy agreement. We never had a redundancy agreement. We had a job security agreement that at the end of the process meant that you could go on redundancy. Your choice, not the company's choice. And even though there was pressure put on, you still had the choice to carry on working because the company employed you for 60 years or 50 years, and it's not your fault. After 20 years, technology has wiped your job out. So the trained people, and they're not the drivers, these are people who are guards, they're station duty, they're cleaners, they're all, the people that keep the service going that you don't see, not the guys sitting at the front. The miners, by the same token, didn't see the writing on the wall. Thatcher made it quite clear, and it was mainly because German coal mines were undermining British coal mines in cost. It's called, we're going to close the mines. Yeah. What Scargill should have been doing was instead of trying to keep mines open that were unsustainable, they should have been negotiating how they put money into other things.
That's the old school way of doing it. It's always been the way, isn't it? Right, everybody else. I mean, simple as that.
No, it's not true because, BT has changed, transformed out of all proportion. But you don't hear about it because there's a good deal going. People take the money. British Airways, you don't hear about half their staff disappearing. British Airways have lost half their staff because they had a good redundancy agreement.
Looking at some of the things coming in here, Mick How can anyone... Mick Lynch is a fraud. How can anyone trust someone who advocated to their members to vote for Brexit, therefore lose their rights, and then complain about such rights being removed 6 years later? Brave or stupid, many strikers are Luddites. Well, that's one way of putting it. Another one was coming in saying, if strikes are outlawed, then the alternative is to leave the job. The result of that is the job has lost permanently a worker. They won't be there the day after, as would be the case in a strike. 952 78 4000 if you've got any thoughts on this. I'll just, if you want to know what the actual numbers are again.
To contact TRE, please call 952 78 4000. Email studio@tre.radio. Send us a WhatsApp on +34 645 99 67 95. Message us on Facebook, Talk Radio Europe Official, or tweet us at TRE Talk Radio.
The weather forecast is brought to you by Liberty Seguros. Liberty Seguros, the #1 preferred expat insurer, has more than 200 dedicated expat agents and brokers who understand your needs and speak your language.
TRE, your voice in Spain. Viewpoint with
Giles Brown.
Always live, always lively. Viewpoint back with me, Giles Brown, with you till 12 o'clock, and then Stephen Ritson takes over with Europe Today. The WhatsApps, +34 645 99 67 95. This one in Rosalind lives in another world. She would rather get another job than strike. So in her view, a trained nurse should find another job if they don't like their work conditions.
Well, every sentence I've started with how sympathetic I am to the conditions the nurses find themselves in, and that I don't think it's right, and they should never be so underpaid and put in such bad. I'm very sympathetic to nurses. No, I don't know what they should do. I've said, except the nurses. They've tried everything, and if they have to strike, then they have to strike. So I'm sorry if our listener doesn't listen to the whole program.
952 78 4000 is the phone numbers. Now, I mentioned just before in those 10 things that we should know today, and one of the facts is that Boris Johnson is being offered £6 million to sell. Rosalind is just shaking her head with a look of absolute horror or disgust, or but he's been offered £6 million to write his book. Nadine Dorris, the culture secretary, and that was an interesting decision. She's already writing a book called The Plot about Johnson's downfall, and unless you've had your head in a particularly large bucket of something or other, you can't fail to have noticed that Prince Harry has written this warts and all book called Spare, and he said the other day, there's enough material for a second one. Book. A second book. Which, so a couple of points here, Ros.
It's 5 on the way and a film series. Something
Harry?
They're going to call it. It's not Harry Potter. It's got Harry Windsor.
And Harry Windsor and the Prisoner of Arkansas. But the thing is, there's a couple of points here. I didn't want to go because Clarkson's has also apologised to the Dutch and to Harry and to Meghan, and they've gone. He's got a long history of this. So that was sort of like backhand down the line.
Dutch and Duchess.
Stranglers fan. Anyway, I know. It's been a while.
Sounds like you were up early this morning.
I was up very early this morning. I was up before the cat. She was wondering what on earth I was doing. Anyway, the Duke and Duchess. Oh, blimey. Anyway, and they've gone, that's just Clarkson, and he looks like he's in trouble. But, should we, is it prurient interest for us? Should we even, they always say everybody's got a book in them, but perhaps some of them shouldn't be written.
It's so trite. I can't believe. And also it's not, actually it did go half price. So I wonder if that's why the sales were the highest ever for a non-fiction book. That it certainly in, I don't know, it's one book store series. It went down to 50%. But anyway, I'm just amazed that so many people are interested in reading a book on Harry's trite comments.
Yeah. It was pre-orders that got it to #1. It wasn't the orders. And on the day, after the first hour, the sales dropped. And by the end of the same day, that's when they started putting a 50% discount on in Waterstones and places like that. But who cares? And the same with Johnson. Actually, I don't think people don't understand. When Thatcher left, she went on, because Johnson not only is this book, he's on the speech tour.
Oh yeah, of course he is.
Earning a fortune. Thatcher, it's estimated, in the year after she stepped down as Prime Minister, earned something like £10 million on the circuit, mainly in America. And you go, for what reason? They earn enough as Prime Minister. And what's her name? Liz Truss. 6 weeks as Prime Minister or 4 weeks as Prime Minister.
44 days.
44 days as Prime Minister, and now she's worth £150,000 a year from all the taxpayers in Britain for giving us the benefit of her rubbish bloody money position.
People are starving around the world.
Well, it's destroyed us as well. The exchange rate at the moment is 113.
Yeah.
It hasn't risen above 113 for about 4 months. John will probably come on and correct me, but yeah, it's so low now, and they keep going on about the economy of Britain, and they keep doing all these same things. And I agree with you, Ros. One of the issues with the nurses and with other people is that, first of all, it's not a job. It's a vocation. People don't become nurses for the money. People don't become nurses because of the process of going through it. And
the same with teachers, and therefore they shouldn't be abused by underpaying them and treating them so badly.
Which is all of us.
Very wrong in our society.
But we all do it.
Johnson writing a book, I mean, okay, he's a good writer, but again, like Harry, it's going to be full of misinformation and lies.
Well,
why do people want to read this stuff? It actually brings to mind George Santos in New York, who has been proven to be a compulsive liar about everything in his life, and he was voted in, and now they can't get rid of him.
For those who are who George Santos is, Ross, please.
Yeah, he's one of the ministers for New York for the government.
Right. Okay.
And Kevin McCarthy, who sold his soul to become the Speaker of the House, was asked, well, are you going to let him come into committees? I mean, he's a compulsive liar. Everything he's ever said is a lie as to what school he went to, what university he went to, the companies he worked for, that he was Jewish. He's not Jewish.
Right, okay.
Everything he's said. And he stands up there and says, well, I think I can do a good job. This has nothing to do with how good a job I can do.
952 78 4000. Got a caller coming in at the moment. Morning, caller. You're live on TRE. What's your name? Where are you calling from? What's your viewpoint, please?
I'm not quite sure. Sharon Alicante.
Hey, Sharon. Happy
Giles,
New Year,
hi.
by the way, I suppose, and welcome back to Viewpoint.
And to you,
Good to hear from you.
Hope you stay well. Are we talking about the public sector workers, or are we talking about Santos? I'm not quite sure what
you go from the public sector workers, because I know you have experience in that particular field.
Yeah, I do. I just want to say that I would say 70% of the very much reduced public services now are kept going, ticking over purely on goodwill. And if this stupid fascist government continue to push the workforce in any area, particularly the nurses and teachers, some teachers are doing 70-hour weeks in Britain, the goodwill could go, and the ambulance driver, for example, that stays behind with a patient for 2 or 3 hours after his shift will stop doing that, and then people will die, and the ambulance driver will not have done anything uncontractual. He will have stuck to his contract, but the goodwill will go, and the thing will then collapse. So they can ban strikes all they like, but at the end of the day, 70% of the ticking over of these services is goodwill now. I think Sunak should think about that. That's just my point. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And also, Sharon, if you're trying to negotiate, it's a misnamed process. They're not negotiating. The government ministers are not negotiating. I don't think they're capable of being negotiated. Shapps and what's his name there, the the new what's his name? Bark. No, I don't know.
Steve Barclay.
Him. They're not negotiators, and you cannot. You can't go into a room and say we're going to have negotiations, and the first words out of their mouth is we're not going to talk to you about what you want to talk about.
Yeah.
That's not negotiations. That's just no. Nobody can negotiate with no.
They're not. They're trying to be smart.
Well, when that woman, the leader of the nurses bit, when she comes out and she says, and I go into a room with him, and he won't even talk to me about the issue that we want to talk about. And I've said to him, meet me halfway, and they won't even respond. And you go, that's because these people do not want to negotiate. And by the way, everybody says, oh, this is like the 1970s. It's not comparable. No, but the history lesson of the 1970s was this is how the unions got rid of a Labour government. It was Callaghan, and we destroyed Callaghan and put Thatcher in, and we've suffered ever since. What a wonderful job the unions did. And we can't afford to do it again. So they could what is it? Never wish for... Oh, what is
Careful what you wish for.
Careful what you wish for.
Thanks a lot. Thank you,
Sharon. Good to hear from you again. We've got another call.
Last thing.
Yeah.
Sympathy and claps don't put food on the table.
Right. Okay. 952 78 4000. Morning, call. You're live on TRE. What's your name? Where are you calling from? What's your viewpoint, please?
Yeah, hi, Giles. It's Kathy from Torreblanca.
Morning, Kathy.
Just a point. Now we've got to the situation, about the strikes, etc. Do you think, or does anyone on the panel, more importantly, out there, think that the Tories are doing this purposely? Because it's going to fail at one point, so they can go on to private insurance.
You mean the Conservatives got a plan to basically sort of run down the NHS? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If it was something like the European scheme, I wouldn't be averse to it.
Yeah,
because it's fair to everyone.
Yeah,
but who knows? Anyway, it's just my point.
I mean, the thing is, and I'm sure the panel will come in, but there's been a lot of people saying this is, and the Conservatives have. There were overtures made to some American healthcare systems as well, and people are always saying, "Oh, but we have our health system, our NHS health system. It's a jewel and whatever." Oh, but then it's getting overcrowded by immigrants, etc. Which is always a red rag to a bull for me. But and you think, well, you've got to make it attractive for people to come into this. If it's got too many people, it's got to. I've had doctors on interviews I've done on Let's Talk saying there's too much management in the NHS and we need more skilled things. But we've also and here comes the first time this time around after Brexit. After Brexit, we've made it a much less attractive place for European workers to work, and the general, including Italian doctors and nurses being told to muck off back to their own countries. So why would you want to?
I know. I think the whole situation is a disgrace. And I live in Spain, like yourself, obviously. And my brothers and my kids live in England, and I'm just totally sickened by it. Or more so because no one seems to be doing anything really about it. You know what I mean? In the guise of how it's run and all that. Anyway, I could go on all day, but I won't.
Okay, well, listen, good to have you with us. Thanks for the phone call in. Always good to have you. 952, thanks very much. 952 78 4000, the phone number, studio@tre.radio, the email, the Facebook page, Talk Radio Official. We can WhatsApp us on +34 645 99 67 95.
It's called an 80-seat majority. It's not that nobody seems to be doing anything about it. It's because the people who can do something about it, back to my old adage, if you're in power, you're going to have to say. If you're not in power, shut up, go away and learn to win power, which is what Labour and others have got to do. Yeah, it is noticeable now that the SNP and Labour are going to get closer on some sort of a compromise package in opposition to the Tories, i.e. Labour would never get a majority. I've said this so many times because they can't get enough seats in Scotland because of the SNP. But the SNP are at least lessening their right-wing stuff and coming more towards the centre because the Tories are beating them out of the right, because the Tories can only take the right wing in Scotland. That's their home patch. So they're beating the SNP to the left, which is pushing them closer to where Labour's position is. And, so we have to stop saying there's nobody out there doing anything. The people that can do something are doing it. We just don't like what they're doing.
952 78 4000. Let's go to some of the WhatsApps that have been coming in. Strikes do not work, but there comes a time when the workforce has no other option available to them other than striking. When an employer refuses to negotiate and doesn't even attend meetings to help avoid such strikes, the UK government are now telling the electorate that strikers are to blame for any hardships, as well as lying isn't ever going to be helpful.
Not only hardships, they're actually telling the British public that the unions are putting their lives at risk on all manner of things, whether it's even on a railway train or whether it's, because you can't get your hospital appointment or because the ambulance driver's not. I mean, I can't tell you enough. I worked mainly in the work is a loose term for what I used to do for BT. But when we did have disputes, we always provided 24-hour cover for all of the emergency services, whether it was an ambulance station, a hospital, a doctor's GP, a surgery, whatever it was. If it was, we never had to do a deal. We just went to BT and said, this is the service we're going to provide for it. BT always had the opportunity to say that's not good enough. They never ever did, because we used to provide a first-class emergency service. End of story. And that's what all the health workers are doing. That's what the ambulance drivers are doing. That's what they're all doing.
Got some more bits and pieces coming. This is about Santos, by the way. Ross, this is Santos is under investigation and might be removed if proved to have done wrong. I wouldn't bet on it, though.
Well, it's not looking that way so far, because his argument is there's nothing wrong with lying. I mean, he admits to not telling the truth and just shrugs his shoulders and said, well, they voted me in and it doesn't affect the way I'm going to represent my constituency.
But it's presumably it's an alternative fact then, isn't it, basically? This is another thing of it's not actually true, it's an alternative fact. So it's my point of view. No.
This is to do with what school he went to and the fact that he was on the volleyball team and won, and the fact that he was Jewish. I mean, I'm talking about fact and fiction.
Okay.
Complete fiction.
9-5, and also another one coming in here. This is another one back to NHS. Why do they not make NHS nurses and ambulance drivers a tax-free status? This would effectively give them a pay rise overnight with no extra cost to the government or tax system. Thank you for that one, Mark.
That's a good one.
Also,
Giles, what about all the other people who work in the NHS who aren't nurses?
What you mean?
Who are frontline people? There are loads and loads. People get the wrong impression. We all look at nurses, they wear the nice uniforms, they're on hospital wards. That is about 10% of the NHS workforce. Seriously, and we all love them to death and we all want them to get paid more. But what about the junior doctors? What about the people who do the blood testing, the lobotomists? Phlebotomists, not lobotomists. Phlebotomists.
There are quite a few.
The blood people.
Quite a few are loose there.
What about those poor guys? I say poor guys because they're not poor guys who work in the mortuary. Mortuary technicians are just as important to an hospital. Otherwise, you've got dead bodies all over the hospital. You have to understand that the NHS in its entirety, the nurses are a focal point, and they have what I consider, I'm not going to swear, they have the crappiest pay, and they have issues because of the long hours they have to do. And how about all those things that they did introduce in the 50s and 60s and 70s, like a nurse having to lift patients out of beds, and they end up having backaches and stuff like that. And they do introduce, but the NHS and the government had to invest heavily in technology, new types of beds, lifting things, all of that stuff. But it takes pressure like this, and I'll say it again. You cannot negotiate with somebody who says no. That's not negotiating. That's just no. And to answer that woman's question, are the Tories doing this purposely?
Yeah.
The Tories have been running down the NHS and privatising the NHS for the last 40-odd years. Even when Labour came to power, they couldn't reverse some of it. So, like I said about your blood organisation, most of the blood technology in Britain was done in Cambridge. Now it's done in America, and they ship the results to England. Cambridge Hospital had the biggest blood bank I've ever seen. That's not keeping blood; it was blood, scientific blood stuff, platelets, and God knows what. It's just.
Let's move on to some.
And how do we deal with? They say, with these pay rises and all the rest of it. Let's give them a tax-free thing. How do you give a tax-free incentive? And please believe me when I say this. How do you give a tax incentive to somebody who works for a part of the NHS who's on a 0 hours contract? Why are the NHS employing people on 0 hours contracts? It's nonsense. 0 hours contracts should be abolished. Nobody should go to work on the off chance that there's some work.
Let's just look at some other things coming in. Republicans can't afford to let Santos go and run a by-election because they only have a 4-seat majority. Fishy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, agreeing. I hated it. Fishy doesn't need to negotiate. Running down the NHS is intentional to get the donors to buy parts of the NHS to get their donors, the Conservative Party donors, that is, to buy parts of the NHS on the cheap, just like they did with the utilities and the train lines. And besides, one thing, learn from history is that no one ever learns from history. Private insurance isn't private healthcare is not an issue. European healthcare is far superior to UK healthcare. Even after all, the NHS is the envy of the world, even though no one copies it. No extra cost to the government. There is a cost, the cost of not receiving their income tax. If anything, nurses should quit their jobs and work for the agencies. Other things coming in are right. We've seen that one. Nurses, excuse me. People stood on their doorsteps clapping for the NHS. These same people need to continue to support the NHS. The NHS is in dire need, all down to government incompetence, and clearly with around 130,000 jobs vacant, the wages need to be increased to attract more workers, or the NHS will surely fail. Those are some points in on the...
It's not... You can't... Right. Management incompetence in the NHS is what drives the service to a poor position.
Yeah.
The government's in their imposition on the health service is the financial one, and it's the government's incompetence on the finances of the health service. For example, the government doesn't, they come out, they make, I always carry them with me, don't I? 50,000 nurses between the last general election and the next one. Not true, because they've probably recruited 20,000 more, but they've lost 40,000, so overall they're still worse off, and people are leaving in droves. They're not all going to private medical companies because there ain't enough of them. A lot of people are just leaving the organisation and going to other jobs where they could earn probably not even as much, but you haven't got the pressures. You haven't got the, you've got to be on duty for 18 hours or whatever they do. You have to. I sat when my mum was in hospital in Bath. I sat talking to the union rep there, as is my wont, because I talked to the workers, and he was most sympathetic to what was going on with the management. As a union person, he was sympathetic to his hospital management in terms of there's little they can do about changing things because they don't have enough budget. But he was scathing about, with the money that they do have, how much waste there was because they don't manage it properly. But a lot of that as well is because if you can't recruit the right level of management, then you're not going to recruit your classic qualified management. The guy who runs an hospital doesn't have to know how to do a blood test. He just has to know how to run an organisation financially. And that's part of the problem, part of the issue.
952 78 4000. We're going to take a quick break and then back for the last 10 minutes or so of Viewpoint.
Viewpoint on Talk Radio Europe with
Giles Brown.
Always live, always lively. In for the last 10... I'm joined by Ross and Scott Gibb and Alf Brewer. In for the last 10 minutes or so. These are the numbers if you want to get a viewpoint across.
To contact TRE, please call 952 78 4000. Email studio@tre.radio. Send us a WhatsApp on +34 645 99 67 95. Message us on Facebook, Talk Radio Europe Official, or tweet us at TRE Talk Radio.
So we can get some more points of view coming across on the NHS. Bits and pieces coming in. NHS management couldn't manage an orgy at a house of negotiable virtue. Incompetent is the words that somebody's using there as well. Ross, you got some viewpoint you want to bring up as well?
Well, no, I just thought finally we're getting a reaction from Netanyahu, who is, of course, back into power. Yeah. Sold his soul to keep power and to stay out of prison.
When you say sold his soul, how exactly do you mean that?
Well, to the extreme right wing, who he's taken on as a coalition. But 80,000, it's not me, it's 80,000 have been out. First demonstration in many, many years about what's going on. Because of, I watch it to see what's going on with Palestine and how unfairly they're being treated and all their housing taken away and all their rights going. So the people in Israel, and as I say, I'm very pro-Jewish. I have more Jewish friends than probably any others, and I am a great admirer of Jewish people. Mm-hmm. But I thought Netanyahu was quite good, but I'm very concerned what's going to happen in Israel, and I don't like the way they're treating the Palestinians.
But it's again, I mean, as Alf always says, the business of politics is to get power, isn't it? Basically,
politics is the art of the possible. Yeah, you can only achieve the possible if you've got the power.
Right. And so what we've seen is with the variety of leaders, we've seen that in the past decade, is that leaders will try and cling on to power by any means possible. By voting to whatever denominator they think is going to, to keep them in that office, be it.
So you think that's right? That's ethical? That's the way it should be done?
I'm not saying that, but we're talking about politics. And politics and ethics, you could argue, are two entirely different things. Couldn't you? I mean, that's the situation. I mean, you've got a leader there who wants to be in power. So he will do a deal with, as you said, he sold his soul for that one.
Also to stay out of prison.
I'm loud and clear.
You leant back and I couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, there's 3 court cases against him going on. So the people are rising up, and that's good. That's a step in the right direction. I think that was yesterday.
Yeah, but the people rose up and they elected him. However, he's cobbled together this, whatever it is, and to say, I thought Netanyahu was good, it's like, wow, he was good at killing Palestinians, he was good at keeping the Gaza happy, he was good at opposing Hezbollah. I'm not sure he was much good with Reagan or with Clinton or with Obama. Not sure about that. I think he got up their noses as much as Iran did.
Just quickly to Richard, when I said house that couldn't organise an orgy in a house of negotiable virtue, that's just one of my little sayings that I say. I can say the word brothel on air. It's okay. So I said brothel. Okay, so that's the thing. It's like I don't call them prostitutes. I call them ladies of negotiable virtue.
I'm from East London. It's called brewery.
Yeah, I'm sure. Is it really? Right, there you go. Then. So anyway, I was just trying to sort of use some of my verbosity.
Couldn't organise a woman in a brewery.
Right, exactly. So there you go. We can say that anyway. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing that the situation is developing like this then in Israel.
Well, I think it's a healthy. I've just been a bit surprised that Jewish people around the world have not come in and spoken up more. So this is the first time I've seen Israelis, at least, demonstrating against what's going on in Israel and the decisions that are being made against the Palestinians.
Do you think this is a starting point, or do you think it's
I think it's a starting point.
Right.
They've gone too far. I mean, they've been moving to the right for the last 10 years and getting more and more power. And finally, in my opinion, it's a step in the right direction.
I think the Israelis are frightened of seeing more of the guerrilla warfare type, bus bombings and stuff like that. And by introducing this person who provokes it, if I say it mildly, then I think normal Israelis are frightened for their well-being. But at the end of the day, they won the election. They are in power. They do make the decisions. Live with them.
And we've got a caller coming on, 952 78 4000. Good morning, caller. You're live on TRE. What's your name? Where are you calling from? What's your viewpoint, please?
Good morning. It's Gil from Calpe.
Morning, Gil.
Hi, yes. I missed a lot of the discussion because I was working and I was with customers, but I did hear, a few things about Israel that you mentioned. I think most of the public doesn't really understand what is going on. Like, for instance, the demonstration that was there a few days ago was nothing to do with the Palestinian. Well, not really. It's more or less the fact that Netanyahu wants to reform the justice system, and he wants the Supreme Court to have different powers to make it look much more like other countries. And that's what the demonstration was about.
People are demonstrating against the Israel justice system being given a more, if you like, and forgive my clumsy wording, a more Western look?
Yes, if you compare one has to go into details into the reforms that Netanyahu is suggesting about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has more power there than let's say in other Western countries. And he wants to change a few things there, and that's what it is about. And it's got, there will be some implications about dealing with the Palestinians with that, but it's not directly to do with the situation.
So now, is that a good idea, Gil? Is this? Do you think this is positive?
Well, look, the whole situation with the West Bank is just so ridiculous. Where do you start talking about it? I mean, it's not part of the country, but it's not independent either. It's sort of a Swiss cheese sort of arrangement. So, I do agree the whole system is a bit ridiculous. But since you talked about what is going on with the Palestinians recently, What Netanyahu did recently is he cut the funds to the Palestinians because he said to them, look, I'm cutting the funds as long as you are supporting terrorism. What happens is the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, gives money to the family of every martyr, of every suicide bomber who kills himself in order to kill civilians. And so far this year, they killed about 20 Israeli civilians, and no country condemned these terrorist attacks, and certainly not the United Nations. So Netanyahu said basically, we're gonna block the funds that come from the European Union to the Palestinian Authority till they stop this habit of theirs to support every family of every suicide bomber. I mean, everyone who bombs himself gets into heaven and has got 72 virgins. That should be enough. They don't have to support their families.
Thanks for that call. Thanks for the call as well. The bongos are coming, and that means we're out of time. My thanks to my guests, Rosalind Scott-Gibb.
Thank you, Giles.
And Alf Brewer.
I never got to mention Brexit. Well, Spanish local elections. Have you ever seen them spending so much money? This show will be repeated. Somebody just come in. I'll buy spare. It's cheaper than toilet paper. This show will be repeated at 7 o'clock. Stephen Ritson up next.
The views expressed on Viewpoint by invited studio guests and callers do not constitute an opinion endorsed in any way by Talk Radio Europe.
You've been listening to a TRE production. If you've enjoyed this programme, there'll be another episode waiting for you next week, right here on this platform, where you can also access our extensive back catalogue of shows and interviews. For more information on our live programming, social media channels and apps, and how to contact Talk Radio Europe, please visit tre.radio.